Fellow cardboarders, welcome back. This is a deep dive into the Atraxa Saga deck, which we voted on, or as we like to call it on the channel, Think Outside the Deck Box. I sorted the deck into different piles. I would go through them one by one. This is the lands pile, the saga pile, the removal pile, ramp pile, card draw pile, and I would say the rest pile. And that's the commander. So you can just skip to any part of the video where I touch one of the certain piles if you just want to look at a specific pile. For the rest, just enjoy the video and see what I did with the deck, and then you can build yourself. So since this is a Saga Atraxa deck, let's start with the Sagas. I think I put in like 30 Sagas in there, so we can call it a Saga deck. I think I did not sort them in any way. I would just look through them. You can stop the video at any point to read through the card. There are some German ones. I am from Germany. I will put the translation, the English original card on the screen. So let's just look through there. I will comment on some of them, but not on all of them since it's just too much to read. The idea is just, I put in some of the sagas I had. I traded for some of the others and I still am missing some. So this one is a removal card. Saga, which I find very useful, so keep in mind the removal pile is a little smaller since there are some sagas that just are great removals. Therefore I was able to reduce the removal pile by a couple of cards. So this one is just some random card, I'd say, not very useful. It has a backside like some of the others, but it's not especially tuned towards the Atraxa Saga idea. The idea of the deck was that Atraxa can be built in a fair way by combining her with sagas, being able to proliferate the sagas and going through them faster and maybe recurring them later on in the game, or removing some counters again to have the effects again during multiple turns. So this one is another card that removes creatures. This one has a backside as well. So I guess you could put this into the card draw pile. This one is just for scrying, I guess. So nothing special. This one could be switched out by any other saga that is better. Another removal and ramp card, so this one I would say is very useful. The last effect is probably quite useless since Atraxa has Death Touch herself. Makes the Atraxa bigger, okay, and yeah, not very useful. You could switch it out with another saga if you have better ones. This one can have some targets in this deck, but maybe could be switched out with another more useful saga, though I do like the backside, which is kind of a Staxy creature. But then again, if you find another better saga, just put it in here. This one counts as removal, I'd say, since Atraxa is an angel and the second effect gives all angels the ability to remove a creature, so that's useful. You might win with commander damage, so giving Atraxa double strike is quite useful, and since she has flying, she's quite evasive. So I would use that or keep it in there. This one could say is kind of a board wipe, since Atraxa will probably never be removed with this one since she has vigilance. So probably keep that in there. Some ramp, I guess, useful. Some card draw, okay. Another removal card. Some shenanigans where you're able to cast cards from your opponent's libraries, okay. Probably another card that can be removed. It's a bad card draw, I guess. This one fetches you a basic plains. I played 2 basic lands of each type. This one does reanimate some sagas, but also some other cards, so that's okay. Could reanimate a fetch land as well. And on the back, this guy creates some tokens. This one is okay. I do not play that many instants and sorceries that this one can target. It's an okay card, I guess. Could play Replenish again, probably. I have Replenish in there, obviously, to reanimate all my sagas again. This one is an okay guy, I guess. Not very useful. Could be replaced. Another removal card, and on the back it draws you a card, so it is also a card draw card, okay. Another ramp and another ability to pump my Atraxa and give her trample. Okay, would keep that probably. I would count this as card draw maybe, or mana fixing. And on the back, it's just a big boy. So I guess it's useful. Maybe there are better sagas to put in there. Probably a card draw, and on the back side, it's another big boy. So could be replaced maybe with a better card, since it costs 5 mana. This one, I guess, is a card draw since it triggers with Atraxa hitting a player. You would have to ask your playgroup if they're fine with cards from outside the game. Otherwise, you maybe build a sideboard or you don't put it in there. This one I find very useful since you can give your opponent some sagas that are about to die and that don't have any strong effects, or just some useless cards you want to exchange. You can even exchange this one and give your opponents the card for their last effect and just take their strongest enchantment maybe. So I would keep that in there, that is quite useful. Guess this counts as ramp, and on the back probably a card for politics, otherwise not very useful. The instability card here is a great board wipe, which can protect 2 permanents. Another card I would put in the removal category. Another solid graveyard hate card. This one can probably kill an opponent depending on how many enchantments you already have on the battlefield. And I think on the back it's a creature that is as big as your artifact and enchantment. Okay, so probably keep that in there, since this one can come out of the blue. And this one probably can be replaced with another card since it's just very, very weak. As you've seen, the saga pile is very easily to be achieved. Just put some sagas in and the deck will work on its own. Now let's look at some cards that synergize nicely with the sagas. I tried to sort this pile a little. This one might be an unknown card, but maybe you already read it. This one is unblockable, and an unblockable creature for 3, and it can remove a counter from a permanent, so you can remove a counter from a saga again and have the effect next turn. By the way, for the ruling of sagas, if you have this saga, let's say at 2 counters, and you remove 1 counter, you don't get the effect again through removing. So keep that in mind. You only get an effect again from a saga when you put a counter on it. So that is very important to keep in mind. So that means the proliferate ability, yes, works with her, but removing counters does not work to get a trigger, but it works to have a trigger at a later point when you put a counter on it again. Chise also allows you to remove a counter from a saga, this one as well, and you can even pump up your Atraxa maybe if you want. These 2 allow you to put your sagas back into your hand and therefore get their effects again every turn. Ether Snap is a card I'm still trying out, but I also think it's a good removal card. So maybe someone has a lot of tokens Maybe someone also has a lot of counters and wants to keep them. We don't. We want to replace them and remove them all the time as much as we can. And this one does exactly that. Maybe for 5 mana it's a little too much, but I'm still trying this card out. Clock Spinning also removes a counter. It can also put a counter on a card, but I think with the buyback ability you just want to remove them. But the instant speed ability also makes it a nice kind of surprise that you tick one of your sagas up in response to something, so I think this one is quite a nice card in here. Replenish, obviously, great card to get all your dead sagas back onto the field, so this probably will reanimate at least, let's say, 5 sagas every time you cast it. Very useful. This one protects your sagas and you can sacrifice it to get a saga out of your deck. Very useful. Another Tutor. Holistic Wisdom is a card that I think is very undervalued. You can remove, let's say, a saga from your hand, any card of any type from your hand, and get a card from the graveyard back into your hand. So let's say you have a bad saga that you want to remove, and then you can choose any saga from your graveyard and get it back into your hand. You can do it as well with creatures, for example, or sorceries or lands or whatever. But in other words, this card replaces one of your cards of one type with the best card from your graveyard of that type. And that just for 2 mana, and it can be repeated, which is why I think this card is a very great use in this deck, and it is an enchantment, and we're gonna draw cards for enchantment casting, so checks all the boxes in my eyes. Also put in 1 blink card, I think, so this one can also, again, either save our commander and put her back with a +1/+1 counter, or save a saga from dying, and we can just restart it from the beginning again. This one can copy one of these sagas. It will start with 0 and then get a counter at the beginning of the next upkeep again, or at the beginning of the next draw step, obviously. And lastly, from the... oh no, we have another card. So the second to last card is Leyline of Anticipation. I think it's very great to surprise your opponents with sagas. You're just gonna flash onto the battlefield. Maybe even at the end of your opponent's turn, before it's your turn, you smack out a couple of sagas, put a counter on them, and then at the beginning of your draw step you get another counter. And at the end of the turn you get a third counter. So you can get 3 counters out of casting these sagas at the end of your opponent's turn, just before your turn. And I think that should be included in my eyes. And another fun card that I think is underplayed and probably not known by many, Legacy's Allure for 2 blue. This one puts a counter on itself every upkeep, and you can sacrifice it at any point to gain control of a creature with power less or equal than the amount of counters on here. So this one will get 2 counters every turn with Atraxa out, and at some point you can take their best creature. And I just found it very fitting in a proliferate deck, though this one could be replaced with any saga or any tutor or whatever, since it's not necessary. But I just found it a fun inclusion and an undervalued card, which I wanted to share on the channel. Let's look at the card draw category. We have the Mesa Enchantress, obviously, which draws a card whenever we cast a enchantment spell. We have this enchantment, which does the same. This card I put in as card draw, since it will always, on average, give us 1 land into the hand whenever we have an enchantment enter the battlefield. So this fixes our lands, and therefore kind of always draws a card, always draws a land. Sithis, obviously another card drawer for enchantments. This one triggers whenever an enchantment hits the battlefield, very useful. And this one as well also draws a card, also gets bigger, very good. And lastly, Mystic Remora. Obviously we don't want to put more counters on it, but if we can remove counters from this one, so this one should stick around even longer than in the usual decks where you play it, which is pretty much every blue deck. Ramp category. Exploration, put in more additional lands every turn. Replicating Ring I just found very fitting. Solid Mana Rock for 3, and it gets a counter on it every upkeep. As soon as you hit 8 of these counters, you create 8 copies of this ring and start all over again. So this one can get out of hand very fast, though I think I never actually replicated it, but I find it a very good proliferate target, and I think most of the times it gets removed. But if it does, well, they played their removal, so that's nice. So they don't play it on other more important cards. This guy fetches twice 2 of my basics, and I can proliferate him. This prism, just awesome. I always proliferate it and try to keep at least 1 counter on it. So this one is just a 2 mana rock that gives me 1 mana, and if I need a second one, 2 manas in 1 turn. 3 visits, explains itself. Dryad also gives all my lands the ability to tap for any mana of any color. This one fetches 3 lands. Obviously with Atraxa out, it fetches even faster. And lastly, probably one of the strongest mana rocks in this deck. This one enters with X charge counters, and I can tap, choose a color, and get that much mana equal to the amount of counters I have on this. And with Atraxa proliferating, I will get a whole bunch of mana. I just saw another card here. Okay, so 3 visits with another name. Very useful. Now lastly, before we go into the lands, our very small removal pile. This one resets all the sagas. We don't play it if we don't have 7 cards in our graveyard with Threshold. So we destroy all enchantments for 3 mana and then return all the enchantments we just destroyed back into play, resetting the counters on all our sagas. This giant is a continuous board wipe. If we play a lot of enchantments, this one pretty much removes the whole opponent's board, keeps tokens dead, so I found this a very useful inclusion. It's also an enchantment, so it also draws cards with our enchantresses. This one I just find very useful. Enchantment that removes all the abilities from a creature. You could replace it with anything else, but I just like this card since it's so versatile. And lastly, a graveyard removal that triggers whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control. So you have a Bajuka Bog on a creature that triggers multiple times. And lastly, before we end the video here, thank you everyone for sticking around. Let's look at the beautiful lands. We have a whole bunch of dual lands here. So we have those that check for opponents. We have those 3 here. We have another 2 that just draw you cards if you sacrifice them at some point. We have some shocklands here. I don't think I even put in all the shocklands. Yeah, there are 4 missing, but we also have some triumphs, and I just put in the lands I found. And if you wanna like really perfect it, just go ahead and do that. So we have some that check my lands if I have enough, or some of a certain type. 4 of these, okay. We have a pain land here and some 2 triomes, which we can fetch as well. I think we're playing like 4 fetch lands. Yeah, so 1 for a basic land and 3 for some of my triumphs or a shock land. Then we have those MDFC lands, which we can flip to either side. I don't play a blued one because I didn't find one. Don't have to include those, can put in any dual land or whatever you find in here. Another card, 2 cards that give me mana probably of any color. And then we play 3 of the proliferate lands, which are great. You can put in storage counters and at some point proliferate them, get more and more counters, and at some point you can remove them and get a whole bunch of mana for a explosive turn when you want to play a lot of stuff. And then, as I already stated, 2 of each basic land. I chose those beautiful Ice Age basic lands And yeah, if you have any ideas for this Saga Atraxa deck, let me know in the comments below. This is where I also put a deck list for you to read and get inspired. Do let me know if you enjoy these kinds of videos. Stay healthy, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.